The Galactic Concord had existed for 12,000 years before humanity ever looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. It was an alliance of 847 species spread across the Orion arm of the Milky Way galaxy, and it operated on one simple principle: the strong ruled and the weak obeyed. This was not cruelty in their eyes, but simply the natural order of things. When humanity finally developed faster than light travel and stumbled into Concord space, the ancient races looked upon them with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. The Evaluation Commission spent 3 standard months studying these strange new creatures from the planet called Earth. Their report was not flattering. Humans were classified as a Class 7 primitive species, which meant they were considered intelligent enough to join the Concord, but too weak to matter. Their technology was crude by galactic standards. Their ships were slow and poorly armed. Their military consisted of barely 200 vessels, which would not be enough to defend a single moon against a proper fleet. The Commission noted that humans came from what they called a death world, a planet with extreme temperature variations, active geological processes, dangerous predators, and an atmosphere that would poison most species in the galaxy. How these soft creatures had survived such a hostile environment was something of a mystery, but survive they had, and now here they were, asking to join the galactic community. With bright eyes and hopeful smiles, Ambassador Yuki Tanaka was chosen to represent humanity at the Concord Assembly. She was a small woman by human standards, with dark hair and darker eyes, and she carried herself with a quiet dignity that some of the elder races found almost charming. She asked too many questions. She wanted to know about trade agreements and cultural exchanges and scientific cooperation. She wanted to know about the history of species that had been traveling between stars when her ancestors were still living in caves. The elder races answered her questions with patience. The way one might explain simple things to a child, they found humans quaint. Here was a species that lived for barely a century, that had been civilized for only a few thousand years, that had been in space for less than 300 years. And yet they seemed so cheerful about everything, so optimistic, so completely unaware of how small and insignificant they were in the grand scheme of things. Ambassador Tanaka smiled and nodded and took careful notes on everything she learned. What the elder races did not realize was that behind that polite smile, she was also taking notes on something else entirely. She was learning how power worked in the Concord. She was learning who was strong and who was weak. She was learning what happened to species that could not defend themselves. The Vethkai Dominion was one of the 3 most powerful military forces in the Concord. They were a reptilian species, cold-blooded in both body and temperament, and they had built their empire through conquest. Their warriors stood nearly 3 meters tall, covered in scales that could stop a blade, with claws that could tear through metal. They had 40,000 warships and a reputation for ruthless efficiency. When the Vethkai looked at humanity, they did not see a new friend or a curious novelty. They saw an opportunity. Human space contained 17 star systems. 12 of those systems were rich in resources that the Vethkai wanted. 3 of those systems contained colony worlds where 400,000 humans had built new lives. The humans had no significant allies in the Concord. They had no real fleet to speak of. They had no understanding of how galactic politics actually worked. Commander Kethro of the Vethkai War Council looked at the star maps and made a simple calculation. The humans were weak. The humans had things the Vethkai wanted. Therefore, the Vethkai would take those things. It was the natural order. It was how the galaxy had always worked. It was what the Concord's laws permitted. Because the laws had been written by the strong to benefit the strong, Cathrall submitted his proposal to the High Council. And they approved it without much debate. The Vethkai had absorbed 14 primitive species this way over the centuries. Sometimes those species had resisted, sometimes they had not. Either way, the result was always the same. The strong took what they wanted, and the weak learned to accept their place. 6 months after humanity joined the Concord, a Vethkai diplomatic vessel requested a meeting with Earth's leadership. Ambassador Tanaka received the news with her usual polite smile, but that night, alone in her quarters, she pulled up everything she had learned about the Vethkai Dominion. She read about the 14 species they had absorbed. She read about how those wars had been fought. She read about what had happened to the species that resisted, and for the first time since she had arrived at the Concord Assembly, Yuki Tanaka stopped smiling. She picked up her communicator and sent an encrypted message to Earth. "We have a problem," she said. "They think we are prey, thousands of light years away." In a conference room in Geneva, the leaders of Earth received her message. They read through the intelligence she had gathered. They looked at the numbers. 40,000. Vethkai, warships against humanity's 200. They understood exactly what was coming, and deep in the hearts of every person in that room, something ancient stirred, something that had been born in the caves and the forests and the frozen plains of their brutal homeworld, something that whispered a single word in response to the threat that was coming. No, the Vethkai did not know it yet, but they had made a terrible mistake. They had looked at humanity and seen only what they wanted to see. They had not seen the truth of what humans really were. They would learn. The galaxy would learn, and the lesson would be written in fire and blood. The Vethkai diplomatic vessel was the size of a small city. It descended through Earth's atmosphere with the slow arrogance of a predator that had never known fear. And it landed in Geneva on a clear spring morning. Commander Cathrall led the delegation personally. He stood 3 meters tall with scales the color of dried blood. And when he walked into the United Nations chamber, he did not bow or offer any gesture of respect. He simply looked at the assembled human leaders the way a farmer might look at livestock. "You have something that belongs to the Vethkai Dominion," he said without preamble. 12 of your star systems contain resources that we require, and 3 of your colony worlds occupy space that we have claimed. The chamber was silent. "You will cede these territories to us within 30 standard days," Cathrall continued. "Your colonists may leave if they wish, or they may remain as workers under Vethkai administration. If you do not comply, we will take what we want by force, and there will be no mercy for those who resist." Secretary General Marcus Webb was a tall man with gray hair and steady hands, and he had spent his entire career learning how to remain calm in the face of crisis. He remained calm now. "Commander," he said quietly, "you are asking us to surrender 400,000 of our citizens and more than 2/3 of our territory." "I am not asking," Cathrall replied. "I am informing you of what will happen. You have 30 days." After the Vethkai left, Ambassador Tanaka sent an emergency request to the Concord Assembly. She stood before the gathered representatives of 800 species and asked for help. She asked for intervention. She asked for justice. The response was sympathetic, but firm. "This is regrettable," said the Lorth the Elder, speaking for the Concord Council, "but it is not unprecedented, and it is not illegal under our laws. The Vethkai have the right to expand their territory, and you have the right to resist. That is how the galaxy works. It is how it has always worked. We are not unsympathetic to your situation," the Elder continued, "but we cannot intervene in what is essentially a dispute between a provisional member and an established power. My advice to you Ambassador, is to accept the terms. Your people will survive as a client species of the Vethkai. You will lose some freedom, but you will keep your lives. This is simply how things are. Tanaka listened to these words with a face carved from stone. She returned to Earth and reported what she had learned. The galaxy would not help them. The galaxy did not care. Humanity stood alone. The United Nations held an emergency session that lasted 3 days. Military experts presented the cold facts of the situation. The Vethkai had 40,000 warships, each one larger and more powerful than anything humanity possessed. Their smallest dreadnought carried enough firepower to reduce a planet to ash. Their soldiers were stronger, faster, and better equipped than any human force against this. Humanity had 200 vessels and a combined military of perhaps 10 million soldiers scattered across 17 star systems. We cannot win this war. General Sarah Chen told the assembly. Our fleet would be destroyed in the first engagement. Our colonies would fall within weeks. Earth itself could hold out for perhaps a few months before orbital bombardment made continued resistance pointless. The numbers do not lie. If we fight, we die. The chamber fell silent as her words sank, and surrender meant survival. But survival as slaves, fighting meant death. But death with dignity. It was not an easy choice. It was not a choice anyone wanted to make. Secretary General Webb called for a vote one by one. The representatives of Earth's nations stood and gave their answer. China voted no. Russia voted no. The United States voted no. India voted no. Brazil voted no. Nigeria voted no. Australia voted no. Japan voted no. Germany voted no. France voted no. One by one. Every nation on Earth stood and gave the same answer. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would not surrender. Not 1 centimeter of territory. Not one citizen. Not one. World Secretary General Webb drafted the official response himself. It was short and simple. Because some things did not require many words, Ambassador Tanaka delivered the message to the Concord Assembly 3 days later. She stood before the gathered representatives of the galaxy. And she did not smile. The people of Earth have considered the Vethkai ultimatum. She said, "We reject it. We will not surrender our worlds. We will not abandon our people. We will not bow to threats." The chamber buzzed with whispered conversations. The Lord the Elder looked at her with something that might have been pity. "Ambassador," the Elder said gently, "you must understand what you are saying. The Vethkai will destroy you. You cannot win this war. You will die for nothing." Tanaka turned to face the Elder directly. "We would rather die on our feet than live on our knees," she said, "and we do not intend to die." Somewhere in the chamber, Commander Kethrall laughed. It was a harsh sound, like stones grinding together. "Brave words from a doomed species," he said. "I almost admire your courage. But courage will not stop our ships. Courage will not save your colonies. Courage will not protect your children when our soldiers come for them. You have made your choice. Now you will live with the consequences. Or rather," he added with a cold smile, "you will not." Ambassador Tanaka met his gaze without flinching. "You are correct about one thing." "Commander," she said, "we have made our choice, but I do not think you understand what that choice means. You see, we are not like you. We do not calculate the odds and make rational decisions based on likely outcomes. We are humans. We are irrational and stubborn, and we do not know when to quit. You have threatened our homes, our families, and our future. You have told us to submit or die. So let me tell you what we have decided. We have decided that if we must die, we will make sure you never forget us. We have decided that the price of our extinction will be so high that no species will ever threaten humanity again. We have decided that we would rather burn the galaxy down than let you take what is ours. 30 days, Commander. You had better use them wisely, because we certainly will." The galaxy watched with morbid curiosity as humanity prepared for war. Intelligence agencies from dozens of species sent observers to human space, expecting to document the final days of another stubborn primitive race that had refused to accept its place in the natural order. What they documented instead was something that would haunt their reports for centuries. On the first day after the ultimatum, Earth's factories began to retool plants that had been making consumer goods, switched to producing weapons, and ammunition shipyards that had been building civilian transports began converting them into makeshift warships. Scientists who had spent their lives studying abstract theories suddenly found themselves assigned to weapons development programs. On the third day, Earth's governments issued a call for volunteers. They expected perhaps a few million brave souls to answer by the end of the week. They had received over 2 billion applications. Grandmothers who had never held a weapon in their lives demanded to be trained. Children begged their parents to let them help in whatever way they could. People who had spent their entire careers in offices and laboratories lined up at recruitment centers, ready to fight and die for their species. The Lorothy observer assigned to Earth sent a message back to the Concorde. "Something is wrong with my translation software," she wrote. "It keeps telling me that these people are happy about the war. That cannot be correct. No rational species would be happy about facing extinction." But her translation software was working perfectly. The humans were not exactly happy, but they were something that the Lorothy had no word for. They were resolved. They were united. They were ready. And beneath all of that, there was something else, something that made the Lorothy observer deeply uncomfortable. The humans were angry, not the cold anger of a species preparing for a logical conflict. This was something far more primal. This was the hot, burning rage of creatures who had been backed into a corner and had decided that if they were going to die, they would take their enemies with them. On the 10th day, Earth's military academies began offering crash courses in guerrilla warfare. They taught civilians how to make explosives from household chemicals. They taught farmers how to set ambush and booby traps. They taught office workers how to kill with their bare hands. The Vethkai intelligence service intercepted some of these training materials and sent them back to high command. "They are teaching their children how to fight," the report noted. "They are hiding weapons in schools and hospitals. They are preparing their population for a type of warfare that we have not seen in 3,000 years." Commander Cathral dismissed the report. "Desperate measures from a desperate species," he said. "It will make no difference in the end. Their tricks cannot stop our fleet." On the 15th day, the human colony worlds began their preparations. The 400,000 colonists on those 3 worlds had been given a choice: evacuate to Earth or stay and fight. Less than 10,000 chose to leave. The rest stayed, and they transformed their homes into fortresses. Supply caches were buried in hidden locations across every continent. Communication networks were decentralized and hardened against electronic warfare. Every building, every road, every bridge was analyzed for its defensive potential. The colonists did not dig trenches or build walls. Instead, they memorized the layout of their cities. Down to every room and corridor, they identified choke points and kill zones. They placed explosives in buildings and vehicles and infrastructure. They were not preparing to defend their worlds. They were preparing to make those worlds into death traps. On the 20th day, something strange happened. Human ships began disappearing. They would leave port and simply vanish. Their transponders going dark. Their communications going silent. The Vethkai assumed they were deserters fleeing into deep space to escape the coming war. They were wrong. On the 25th day, The Larathi observer requested an audience with the human military command. She wanted to understand what they were planning. General Chen received her in a small office with no decorations except for a single photograph on the desk. It showed two children smiling at the camera. "You cannot win this war," the observer said gently. "The Vethkai will destroy your fleet in the first battle. Your colonies will fall within weeks. Why are you doing this? Why are you choosing extinction?" General Chun looked at the photograph for a long moment before answering. "Those are my daughters," she said. "They are 7 and 9 years old. When the Vethkai came to Earth and demanded our surrender, my youngest asked me if the bad aliens were going to take her away. I told her no. I told her that I would never let anyone hurt her. I told her that Mommy would protect her no matter what." The general's voice was very quiet. "I meant it. Every parent on Earth meant it when they said the same thing to their children. Every soldier in our military means it when they swear to defend our people. We are not choosing extinction, Ambassador. We are choosing to fight. We know the odds. We know we might lose. But some things are worth dying for. Some things are worth more than survival. The Vethkai think they understand war. They do not. They have never faced an enemy that was willing to sacrifice everything. They have never fought a species that would rather burn than submit. They are about to learn what that means. On the 30th day, the Vethkai fleet jumped into human space. 40,000 warships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, ready to crush any resistance and claim their prize. They found empty stations drifting in the void. They found abandoned outposts with no signs of life. They found silence where they had expected defiance. Commander Kethrol smiled. "They have fled," he said. "Their courage failed them in the end. Begin the occupation of the colony worlds. This war is already over." And then the first bomb detonated inside his flagship. It had been hidden in a food shipment that the Vethkai had purchased from human traders 3 weeks earlier. It killed 400 crew members and crippled the ship's main reactor before the fires were extinguished. 100 more explosions rippled through the fleet. Human engineers who had spent the 30 days getting hired by Vethkai supply contractors had done their work well. The war had not even begun, and the Vethkai had already lost their first battle. The Vethkai had expected a war. They had fought 14 wars against primitive species and won. Every single one. They had perfected the art of conquest over thousands of years. They knew exactly how these things went. The enemy would meet them in battle, lose badly, retreat to their homeworld, and eventually surrender when the cost of resistance became too high. It was simple. It was efficient. It was how civilized species conducted warfare. The humans did not cooperate after the initial sabotage attacks destroyed or damaged nearly 300 ships. Commander Kethrol rallied his fleet and pushed toward the first colony world. He expected the humans to make a stand in orbit, to try to defend their world with their pitiful fleet. Instead, he found nothing. The human ships were gone, scattered to hidden locations throughout the system. The orbital stations were empty, stripped of everything valuable. The planet below was silent. Kethrol landed his ground forces, expecting light resistance. What he found was a nightmare. The colonists had not fled. They had not gathered in defensive positions where they could be identified and destroyed. Instead, they had melted into the cities and the wilderness, becoming invisible. The first Vethkai patrol entered a small town and found it completely deserted. They searched building by building, finding nothing, and then the buildings began to explode. The colonists had rigged their own homes with explosives and triggered them remotely. When the patrol was inside, 300 Vethkai soldiers died in the first hour when reinforcements arrived. They found the survivors surrounded by a mob of civilians armed with everything from hunting rifles to kitchen knives. The civilians attacked without hesitation. Without fear, without any regard for their own lives, they died in droves. But they took Vethkai soldiers with them. An old woman walked up to a Vethkai officer with a smile on her face and detonated the explosives hidden under her clothing. A teenage boy led a squad into what he claimed was a hidden weapons cache, then triggered a cave-in that buried them all alive. A farmer invited soldiers into his home to surrender, served them food laced with poison, and watched them die before shooting himself. The Vethkai commanders could not understand what they were seeing. This was not war. This was madness in proper warfare. Civilians stayed out of the fighting in proper warfare. People surrendered when resistance was hopeless in proper warfare. No one chose death over submission, but the humans did not seem to understand the rules, or perhaps they simply did not care. The first colony world fell after 6 days of brutal fighting. The Vethkai had committed 10,000 soldiers to the assault, expecting to take the planet in a matter of hours. By the time it was over, they had lost 40,000 soldiers and 200 ships. The 50,000 human colonists were dead, almost all of them. They had fought to the last, refusing every offer of surrender, killing and dying until there was no one left to fight. And when the Vethkai finally claimed their prize, they found that the colonists had destroyed everything of value before the end. The mines were collapsed, the factories were slag, the cities were ruins. The resources that the Vethkai had come to claim were gone. The Concord observers watching from a safe distance sent their reports back to the assembly. The Larthy ambassador read the reports 3 times, certain she must be misunderstanding something. They did not try to win, she said to her aide. They knew they could not win. So instead, they made sure that the Vethkai would gain nothing from their deaths. They would rather destroy their own world than let their enemy profit from taking it. What kind of species thinks like that? The war continued. The second colony world was even worse. The colonists had learned from the fall of the first world, and they had prepared even more thoroughly. They did not just fight, they hunted. Small teams of humans would track Vethkai patrols through the wilderness and pick them off one by one. Snipers would kill officers and then disappear before retaliation could find them. Supply convoys were ambushed. Soldiers were kidnapped and interrogated. Bases were infiltrated and sabotaged. The Vethkai soldiers began to crack. These were warriors who had never known fear, who had conquered a dozen species without ever doubting their victory. Now they jumped at shadows. They shot at sounds in the night. They dreamed of human faces smiling at them before the explosions came. 3 months into the war, the Vethkai had taken 2 colony worlds and advanced halfway to Earth by any objective measure. They were winning, but their economy was buckling under the cost of the war. They had lost 2,000 ships and 400,000 soldiers. Their factories were working overtime to replace losses that they had never expected to suffer. And worst of all, their people were beginning to ask questions. Why were they fighting these humans? What was the point of conquering worlds that the humans destroyed before surrendering? How many more Vethkai would have to die to claim a few worthless systems commander? Kethril had been hailed as a hero when the war began. Now there were protests. Outside his headquarters, his own officers whispered that he had led them into a trap. The High Council sent messages demanding to know when the war would end, and through it all, the human fleet remained hidden. 200 ships that should have been destroyed in the first battle had vanished into the depths of space. They struck without warning, hitting supply convoys and isolated outposts before disappearing again. They were not trying to win battles. They were bleeding the Vethkai one cut at a time. On the 93rd day of the war, Kethril received a message from his intelligence. Service Earth's defenses were fully prepared. The entire planet had been transformed into a fortress. Every city was a potential death trap. Every citizen was trained and armed. The human military estimated that an invasion of Earth would cost the Vethkai at least 5 million soldiers, and even then, victory was not guaranteed. Kethral stared at the report for a long time. He thought about the colonists who had died rather than submit. He thought about the soldiers who had broken under the strain of fighting an enemy that refused to behave. Rationally, he thought about his own career, which was now in ruins regardless of how the war ended. And finally, he thought about what would happen if he continued. He could conquer Earth. He had the ships. He had the soldiers. But how many would he lose? How many more would die fighting an enemy that would never surrender? Never submit, never stop fighting until every last one of them was dead. And when it was over, when humanity was finally extinct, what would the Vethkai have gained? Broken worlds, empty cities, a reputation for winning a war that had cost them more than they could ever recover. Kethral picked up his communicator and sent a message to Earth. "What do you want to stop?" he asked. The reply came within the hour. It was a single word: more. The war ended not with humanity's extinction, but with the Vethkai withdrawal. It happened quietly, without ceremony, without grand announcements. One day the Vethkai ships simply began to pull back. They abandoned the colony worlds they had spent so much blood to capture. They withdrew from human space entirely. They went home. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. No one could quite believe what had happened. A Class 7 primitive species with 200 ships had faced down one of the three greatest military powers in the Concord. They had not just survived, they had won. The cost had been terrible. 120,000 humans had died defending the colony worlds. Earth's economy was in ruins from the strain of total mobilization. The two fallen colonies were devastated beyond recognition. Their cities burned and their people gone. But humanity was still standing, and the Vethkai dominion was broken. Their economy had collapsed under the weight of a war that had cost them 2,000 ships and 400,000 soldiers. Their government was in chaos as different factions blamed each other for the disaster. Their reputation for military invincibility, carefully built over thousands of years, was destroyed forever. Commander Kethral was executed by his own government. They needed someone to blame, and he had been the one who started the war. His last words were a warning that no one wanted to hear. "We did not lose because we were weak," he said. "We lost because we did not understand what we were fighting. Remember that when the next species comes along, remember what humans are capable of." 1 year after the ultimatum, Ambassador Yuki Tanaka returned to the Concord Assembly. She walked into the great chamber where she had once begged for help and been refused. She stood before the gathered representatives of 800 species who had watched her people fight and die without lifting a finger to assist them. She was not the same woman who had stood here before. The polite smile was gone. The eager questions were gone. The hopeful curiosity that had made the elder races find her so charming was gone. In its place was something harder, something colder, something that made even the most powerful delegates in the chamber uncomfortable. She did not speak immediately. She simply stood there, letting the silence stretch out until it became unbearable. And then she began. 1 year ago, I stood in this chamber and asked for your help. I told you that the Vethkai had threatened my people. I asked you to intervene, to protect us, to uphold the principles of justice that you claim to believe in. You refused. You told me that the strong have the right to take from the weak. You told me that this was simply how things worked. You told me to surrender. She paused, letting her words sink in. I understand why you said those things. You looked at us and saw a primitive species with inferior technology and a tiny fleet. You measured us by our ships and our weapons and our territory. By those metrics, we were nothing. We were prey waiting to be devoured. You made a mistake." Her voice grew harder. "You did not understand what you were looking at. You saw our weakness, but not our strength. You saw our small numbers, but not our determination. You saw creatures who lived short lives on a brutal world and assumed we were fragile. We are not fragile. We are survivors. We did not evolve on a gentle world with predictable seasons and plentiful resources. We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every single day. We survived ice ages that lasted thousands of years. We survived predators that could tear us apart with a single blow. We survived diseases that killed millions of our people. We survived each other. We have been fighting since before we were human. We have been dying and adapting and refusing to surrender since the first of our ancestors stood upright and decided that they would not be prey. That is what you did not understand. That is what the Vethkai did not understand. We do not fight because we think we can win. We fight because something in our blood refuses to submit. We fight because we would rather die free than live as slaves. We fight because when someone threatens our children, our families, our future, we lose the ability to think rationally. We become something else, something dangerous, something that will burn everything it has and everything it is before letting an enemy take what belongs to us. She turned to look directly at the section of the chamber where the Vethkai delegation sat. Their numbers were smaller. Now their scales seemed duller. They did not meet her gaze. "The Vethkai have learned this lesson," Tanaka said. "They paid for it with the blood of 400,000 of their soldiers and the ruins of their economy. They paid for it with their pride and their reputation and their future. I sincerely hope that no one else in this chamber needs to learn the same lesson, because I promise you this. What we did to the Vethkai was mercy. We let them withdraw. We let them go home. We did not pursue them, did not invade their worlds, did not make them pay for every life they took from us. We chose peace because we are tired and we want to rebuild. But do not mistake our desire for peace as weakness. Do not mistake our mercy as an invitation to try again. If anyone in this galaxy ever threatens humanity again, we will not show mercy a second time. We will come for you. We will find you wherever you hide. We will burn your worlds and scatter your ashes among the stars. And we will make sure that the last thing you see before the end is a human face, smiling. Because we will be happy to do it. That is what we are. That is what we have always been. Predators pretending to be prey. And now you know." The chamber was absolutely silent. No one moved. No one spoke. No one could think of anything to say. Ambassador Tanaka nodded once, satisfied, and walked out of the chamber without looking back. 10 years later, humanity had full membership in the Galactic Concord and a permanent seat on the Security Council. No species had threatened human space since the war. The phrase, "Remember the 30 days," entered galactic vocabulary as a warning. A reminder of what happened when someone was foolish enough to corner a human. The Larth the Elder, who had once advised Tanaka to surrender, became one of humanity's strongest allies in the Concord. She told anyone who would listen about what she had witnessed during the war. "I thought I understood them." She would say, "I thought they were simply another young species, foolish and brave and doomed. I was wrong. They are not what they appear to be. They smile and laugh and seem so friendly, so harmless, so eager to make friends. But beneath that surface, there is something else, something ancient, something that remembers what it was like to be hunted in the dark, something that will never forget and will never forgive. Do not threaten them. Do not threaten their children. Do not corner them and give them no way out, because if you do, you will discover why they survived their death world, and you will not survive the lesson." Somewhere in the archives of the Concord, a historian recorded the final analysis of the human Vethkai War. The conclusion would be studied by military academies across the galaxy for thousands of years. They were not soldiers. It read, they were not warriors in the traditional sense. They were something far more dangerous than anything we had ever encountered. They were parents protecting their children. They were families defending their homes. They were a species that had evolved to fight against impossible odds and refused to surrender. There is no force in the universe more terrifying than that. Remember this when you look at humans and see their soft bodies and their short lives and their primitive technology. Remember that they did not survive their world by being weak. Remember that they smile because they choose to, not because they have to. And remember, above all else, that the day you threaten a human is the day you discover why they are still alive, and why you might not be for much longer.